what we are seeking is no new lending in the face of a crisis. It's very clear that more lending in response to a crisis that was originated in the North seems to be fairly widely accepted by almost everyone, that the causes are in the functioning of the system, and the decisions and the actions that have been taken by governments and financial corporate interests in the North. So the idea that the South should continue to pay for the crisis in the North through more lending that will become an additional burden of illegitimate debt is clearly unacceptable. So that was our first point. No new lending in response to the crisis. Obviously, there is a need for financial resources to respond to the impact of the present crises, as others have been saying over the past couple of days, in the context of ongoing crises of an economic, social, and ecological nature throughout the South. So we pointed and wanted to point on two very concrete ways of responding to the need for financial resources in the South to respond to these crises. The first of those, of course, is restitution and reparation for the ecological debt, for the social debts, for the historical and economic debts. And the second of those points, which is our third advocacy, in a sense, line of action, is the question of debt cancellation, debt non-payment, debt repudiation, use the language that you want. We felt that it was particularly important at this moment to raise these three lines of advocacy, recognizing that they don't stand much chance of finding their way into any final outcome document at the UN conference, but at the same time recognizing that each of these points in their own way has now been tabled in international discussion, in international fora, by governments, by international organizations, and that we as a global debt movement can do no less. So we felt it was a particularly important moment to be clear that our message on these three issues was very strong, and that we were being able to get that around. We're in the process of drafting a short statement. I'm not sure exactly if there's a new draft that's available, but in the course of the day, hopefully it will be, and we'll be able to share that and hopefully get some more comments. The idea is also to look at some of the last text that is in the current draft outcome document, what is being discussed, and to develop some advocacy language around some key points. But I do not at this point, maybe others have either that language or that text. It's still a discussion for today. The final point, let me just come back to the kind of the agreement around the advocacy positions. Our final point, I guess 4 points in a sense, was more or less a general kind of overarching endorsement of the notion that the UN is clearly a much better forum to discuss global governance of debt, finance, and monetary institutions, instruments, and practices than is the G8, the G20, or any other forum like the IMF, the World Bank, the Global Stabilization Board, or what have you. So in a generic sense, without getting into many of the details, like the Global Economic Council or expert groups or something like that, we felt it was important to signal that as debt movements, we were certainly more inclined to input and to expect a strong role for the UN.